Welcome back. All right, now that the trade deadline is done, there's a video I like to do. I know I've done this before. I don't know if it's an annual thing, but maybe it can be an annual thing. A player on each team that I'm surprised is still there after the deadline, or maybe we collectively are surprised are still there. I had to get creative. For the teams that are contenders, we're not necessarily surprised when they don't trade pending UFAs or RFAs, right? So I had to get creative about players I'm surprised are still on rosters, and I might have got used players who I'm kind of surprised or happy to see are still in the National Hockey League. And so we'll discuss. So if somebody fast forwards to the end of this, there's gonna be a lot of why is this guy on the list? Stupid hockey guy. Well, if you're gonna fast forward through my explanations, I don't know what to tell you. It's just it's a list video. 32 players. I'm surprised you're still there. So we're gonna start things off with Colorado. Colorado, a contending team. So did I have to get creative? I absolutely did. And it's Jack Johnson. Jack Johnson obviously works in Colorado, and Colorado works for Jack Johnson, vice versa. Like, this is an interesting player in that wherever else he's been, there's always been negativity thrown at him, and he's not very good. But in Colorado, it just works. He's very effective there. Whatever systems work with him, and he works with them, and it's great. It works really, really well. So Johnson back in Colorado, he's still there after the deadline, and he's part of their top six, and I think he's been effective. For Dallas, I had to get creative for Dallas because there wasn't anybody that was rumored to be on their way out of Dallas. Um, so I'm going with Derek Pouliot. With the injuries on the blue line that they were suffering through, and they called up Pouliot, I was surprised Pouliot was still a member of the Dallas organization at that point. Derek Pouliot's been bouncing around for a while, and he was effective when he got called up by Dallas. I thought he looked all right. So if the Dallas Stars came out tomorrow and said, we're going to keep Pouliot into next year and have him as, a call up, I'd be like, sure, cool. It's defensive depth. And Pouliot's embraced that role. He's from the 2012 draft, which is pretty much cursed right out of the gate. But yeah, Pouliot, I think, was good when Dallas called him up, and it's kind of easy to forget that Derek Pouliot's still lingering around NHL circles. For Winnipeg, had to get creative there too, didn't I? So I did go in a random order for this, but yeah, top three teams in the Central, and with Winnipeg, I went with a player who's kind of found a home. Nemesnikov bounced around the league a little bit. He bounced around the league a little bit at the time he got acquired by Winnipeg. There was no reason to think that Winnipeg would be a more permanent home for him, and yet it looks like it is. It looks like Nemesnikov's going to be there for a while. If you told me, hey, Nemesnikov's going to be there the rest of his career, I wouldn't disagree with you. He's found his niche. There are plenty of players in the NHL right now that could use that kind of movement and find a home for themselves, as Nemesnikov has with Winnipeg. That's another video for another time, of course. But Nemesnikov's found that in Winnipeg. I'm happy for him. And he's had productive points during this season as well when Winnipeg needed it. When Winnipeg wasn't scoring at all, Vlad was kind of, getting a goal and an assist here and there to help him out. He was their top scorer at one point over a 1 month period. I know from doing the previews the way I do them now, I try to keep it to the scoring over the last month. Nemesnikov was playing pretty well when the rest of the Jets were struggling. Arizona, I went with one of their pending unrestricted free agents because Arizona hasn't been shy about trading guys out who were pending UFAs. It was between Josh Brown or Liam O'Brien. I went with O'Brien. He has a lower cap hit, and he's kind of what teams say they're looking for at the deadline. He's toughness. He can play a fourth line role. I think he does that well for the Arizona Coyotes. And honestly, his offense, considering for a fourth liner, I think it's been fine. So O'Brien, mildly surprised Arizona didn't rent him out at the deadline. That being said, would I be surprised if he signs an extension with them? Not really. The Coyotes, for all of the talk about whether they're going to go or whether they're going to stay, which is why I'm wearing the Thrashers, because we're talking about, you're still here, we're still talking about Atlanta and whether or not they're going to get a team back in 2024. So O'Brien, and we're still talking about the Coyotes arena situation in 2024 as well, but on the ice and in terms of being able to hold on to players, the Coyotes haven't had many troubles. A lot of teams that have had troubles with players coming up, oh, look, I don't want to be here. I don't want to be here. Arizona hasn't had that much trouble with that, with players. So O'Brien's just the one I wanted to mention from them. Chicago, got a little creative with Chicago too. In the Jared Tenorti at points, it didn't look like he was going to find a landing spot in the National Hockey League. Not quite NHL level skating, not quite NHL level puck handling. But in Chicago, it's worked. Now, I think part of it in Chicago is that Luke Richardson's style of hockey when he played, and he played for a long time, not dissimilar to Tenorti's. I definitely think there's some synergy between the two. And I don't think it's an accident that Tenorti's played his best hockey as a Blackhawk. That being said, would I have been surprised to see Tenorti moved at the deadline? Not really. Am I surprised to see him still there? A little bit. So with Chicago, it was tough because a lot of guys got re-signed for beyond this season. And so, yeah, Tenorti, one player to watch in Chicago this summer is Taylor Hall, who's been injured, of course. He's on an expiring contract. It expires in 2025. Does he stay with the team going into the 2025 or 2024-2025 season? Does something happen? We'll see. But yeah, Tenorti still being there. I'm happy for him. St. Louis, there's a lot of talk in the last week before the deadline with Buchnevich, but there wasn't much in terms of this team's in on Buchnevich and this team wants him, and there's a new front runner for Buchnevich's services. I think St. Louis wanted to move him. I don't think they were able to get back what they wanted for him. Buchnevich is a good forward. He's a good forward. He can score goals. He's got good feet. His skating speed's not bad. I'm kind of surprised St. Louis wasn't able to move him, but at the same time, it didn't feel like he was exactly what other teams were necessarily looking for. I would not be surprised to see him get moved this summer. He may be more attractive to move in the offseason than, say, at the trade deadline. So Buchnevich is my pick for the St. Louis Blues. All right, Minnesota. So for Minnesota, I went with one that we knew by deadline day he wasn't moving, but still. Marc-Andre Fleury may be in the last year of his contract. It doesn't look like Minnesota's going to make the playoffs, but they haven't given up. And Fleury hasn't given up. He wants to be there and help them. And the team decided, well, we're not going to try to trade him. We're going to keep him. So Fleury still being there after the deadline's mildly surprising because Wallstead will be coming up. I would think this offseason, Wallstead moves into one of those top two roles. Likely it's Wallstead and Gustafsson, and then, Fleury, we'll see if he lands somewhere else. If he retires, I would think if Fleury retires, maybe he signs a one-day contract with, would it be Pittsburgh or would it be Las Vegas? There's the question right there. But yeah, for Fleury, maybe Chicago just to throw everybody off. But yeah, Fleury still being in Minnesota, mild surprise there. Nashville, big surprise here. At least, considering where the talk was in December? Tyson Barrie. Barrie, it was clear that they wanted to move him. It was clear he wanted out. There was some disgruntlement when it came to his amount of games being played. Maybe he was right. Maybe he was right that them making him a healthy scratch as often as he was, A, it's going to make it so it's hard to get into a rhythm when you get into the games, and B, it drops your trade value. It means the teams aren't as likely to make that move to pick you up. Even at a 50% retention by Nashville, I don't know that Barrie necessarily would have moved at the deadline. So Barrie's still in Nashville, and we'll see what happens with him this summer. But the fact he's still with the Preds, mildly surprising considering the amount of discussion going on around him this year. Carolina, well, with Carolina, it is interesting because before the season started, I would have said, well, Pesce's gone at the deadline. But I never heard anything about Carolina shopping Pesce. So in the event that Pesce doesn't sign and he leaves in the offseason, well, then they got their own rental, right? He's basically, that's our own rental at the deadline. He's on an expiring contract. Mildly surprised Tony DeAngelo didn't go at the deadline. They did waive him. Teams had a free shot at picking him up for nothing. It didn't happen. The same with Lemieux, though. That was being done for cap flexibility. So does DeAngelo stay with Carolina next year? I don't see any way that he does, but, I mean, it surprised me before where DeAngelo ends up. So, yeah, we'll see. But, yeah, he didn't move. Philadelphia. So towards the deadline, there was speculation about whether or not Lawton might get moved. Lawton's been productive for them, a team that struggles with scoring goals. And I think with the Konechny injury, even if you wanted to move Lawton, it makes it kind of tricky. Philadelphia had to ride that line between staying in a playoff spot or selling. And they kind of did a little bit of both. They sold off a bit. They also bought a bit as well at the deadline. So Lawton stays. Again, we'll probably see what happens with him in the offseason and whether or not he stays a Flyer past this year. But I understood why they didn't move him, but there was definitely discussions of whether or not Lawton would be on the move. For Columbus, where's Leakins? Elvis, it was clear that they wanted to move him and he wanted out, but apparently when they put him on the market, the interest just wasn't there from other teams at a level that they were happy with. There weren't many biting with that contract. Elvis's contract will be tough to move, but Columbus is going to do their best in the offseason to move it, and we'll see if a new general manager maybe is a little bit luckier when it comes to being able to move contracts than what we've seen with Columbus recently. But again, Elvis is still there. He's part of a tandem with Tarasov. As the season goes along, though, it's obvious Tarasov's the better of the two goaltenders. So, again, we'll see what happens with Elvis in the offseason. Pittsburgh. For the Pittsburgh Penguins, I went with a goalie, too, because the goalie market being as it is, and clearly, I'm going to mess this up because I'm talking while I write it down. It's not all old man things either. So, Nedeljkovic, decent numbers as a backup goalie. There were enough teams looking for goaltending help. I wouldn't have been that surprised if Pittsburgh had decided to move Nedeljkovic. Maybe there weren't takers for Nedeljkovic. Maybe they tried. Obviously, I'm not going to put Jari's name up there. It's just it feels like with Pittsburgh being kind of out of the picture and the trades they made, and it's clear they're looking ahead. Nedeljkovic still being there, mild surprise. And again, sometimes you got to get a little bit creative. I didn't see a skater for Pittsburgh that I could point at and say, I'm surprised he's still there. But goaltender, I could definitely put Nedeljkovic's name down. For New Jersey, I've talked about Holtz lately. There's been a lot of talk about Holtz lately and whether or not they're using him correctly, whether or not he's happy there, whether or not he's going to stay, and all of that. And GM Tom Fitzgerald certainly did not talk about Holtz in a glowing manner when asked about Holtz and his play. And I do feel like Holtz may very well find himself out of New Jersey over the summer. His development has been slow. Maybe it's not going to work in the Devils organization. Many of the pauses are because of animals heading off a cat fight. I know a cat fight would cause a video to go viral, but I can't. So, Holtz being a member of the New Jersey Devils organization, we'll see how much longer that's the case. It does feel like we're running short, but I've said that about Wahlstrom with the Islanders, and he's still there. It is not Wahlstrom for the Islanders, though. In fact, this is kind of a complimentary one. Yeah, they're not negative. This one's complimentary. Mike Riley picked up on waivers. He's fit in really well with the Islanders. He's part of their top six. He's been effective. I think this might be some of the best hockey I've seen Riley play. This is why when people say this player is garbage, I don't jump on the bandwagon. I don't do that. Now, before I had a channel, I might. Maybe like, that guy sucks. But I've seen enough over the last 7 years of running this channel of players going from one organization to another being declared garbage by a fan base or whatever. Or just the advanced stats being really bad, going to another organization, and then they just figure it out. And with Riley, it just feels like it's worked with the New York Islanders. It was a really smart pickup. So I wanted to throw his name on the board. He's still there after the deadline when the Islanders, who were buying, if they thought their blue line wasn't good enough, Lou's not going to be shy about going out and fixing it. Riley still being a part of it says a lot about what he's been able to do. Caps. It feels like this one should have an asterisk next to it. It's not going to be the only one that it feels that way about. Because they did try to move Pacioretty at the deadline. He turned down trades. That's what a no trade / no movement clause is for. Is so players have the choice about whether or not they want to go. And I don't begrudge them that. I don't think organizations do either, or else you don't give or acquire players with no trade, no movement protection. You negotiate that out too, and you're signing to contracts if you don't want them to have it. So Pacioretty still being with the Caps, good on him. And if he helps them get above the playoff line by the end of the season, and if they can make the playoffs in part because of Pacioretty, he's going to make them look smart for not being traded. The Rangers. I'm going to go with the name I've written on the board before. The Rangers, it's Kakko. I do wonder with Kakko, like how much longer he's going to be a Ranger, and I think he's been good this year. The numbers don't back it up. Like, the numbers don't back up the fact that I think Kakko, for the last couple of years, has been fine for the New York Rangers, but the offense is not there. And for Capo, I do wonder if he's going to be a Ranger long term, or if maybe to get him to help realize some of that potential that caused him to be such a high draft pick, if he needs to go somewhere else. So would I be surprised to see him moved in the offseason? No, but he's as close to a surprise that's still with the Rangers that I could come up with at this point. Vegas. So Vegas is not known for being loyal to its players, right? They're willing to sacrifice and jettison almost anybody. Braden McNabb's still there. He is still there from the first day that this franchise, got its expansion draft picks. McNabb was one of them. He's still there, and he's playing well. And it's easy to overlook him. So while there's others I might have thought of with Vegas, I considered Leonard, but is Leonard really still there? Has anybody seen Robin Leonard? Anyways, Braden McNabb is the pick for me with Vegas because he's still there. People don't talk a lot about McNabb in his game, but he's still effective. And so, yeah, I think McNabb should be the one on the board for Vegas. You guys can absolutely let me know which players you'd pick for this list, though. Why not? For Vancouver, based on all of the rumblings at the deadline, I'm going with Elias Lindholm. So the Canucks are on a 9-game homestand, which should mitigate any problems with Demko being hurt, because they'll be at home cooking and all that fun stuff. And they have Abbotsford, the AHL teams right there. But Lindholm, there was a lot of discussions about whether or not he would still be a Canuck. That maybe it's a bad fit, and they're going to trade him to Boston, and then Gensel's going to come into Vancouver, or DeBrusk's going to go to Pittsburgh, or DeBrusk will go to Vancouver. Whatever was going to happen didn't happen. And so Lindholm's still a member of the Canucks. I don't think he's going to be a Canuck once we reach July 1st. He's on an expiring contract. I don't think he extends in Vancouver. I think he ends up going somewhere else. Whether he just goes UFA or if the Canucks trade him, we'll see. Because there's still time to trade him at, say, the draft table. But I don't think Lindholm's going to get a great return for Vancouver if they decide to move him. And I just don't see how he stays into next season. Calgary. So a lot of guys left. But the one that had the most discussion about him, that didn't make a lot of sense, to be honest, is Markstrom. That being said, I did keep playing devil's advocate and saying, you know what? The trade value for Markstrom will never be higher than at this trade deadline. So I understand why Calgary would have looked at moving Markstrom. I also understand why Markstrom would be kind of ticked off with that whole speculation. But Jacob Markstrom has had, if you look, and I know people get mad because everybody talks up Markstrom. He's not that great. Look at his numbers. Look at his advanced stats. Look at his goals saved above expected. He's very good. Markstrom's had a really, really strong season for a Calgary team that has not been good. Markstrom has been single-handedly getting them some wins here and there. So the idea of trading him makes some sense, but at the same time, I think if you're going to try to push for the playoffs, which this weekend showed they're not going to, but I understand why on Friday he doesn't get moved, and I understand why he's irritated. I do think he gets moved this summer, though. Anaheim. So another player that had been discussed a lot was Frankie Vatrano. I've been a big fan of Vatrano's for a long time, and I was, fingers crossed, during that whole live stream, I kept waiting to hear the Vancouver Canucks have acquired Frank Vatrano from the Ducks in exchange for, say, like a second-round pick and a fourth. Whatever, right? That's what I was waiting to hear, was that Vatrano was traded to Vancouver, especially once Gensel was gone, once some of the other bigger names were gone. I thought, you know what, Vatrano could be great on a dime for them. But it didn't happen. Vatrano's still a member of the Ducks. I think he likes it there. He's playing the best hockey he has in his career. So maybe Vatrano stays beyond this season. But yeah, his name was out there quite a bit, and he's still there. Edmonton. So Edmonton, this is a player that's actually in the AHL, but I had to point this out. There isn't really anybody on their NHL roster that I say, oh, I'm surprised he's still there. But Jack Campbell, despite everything, now he's stuck in the AHL because Calvin Pickard has looked really good for Edmonton lately. I mean, we know Skinner's not going anywhere. So for Campbell, who's had a good run in the AHL, he's not been bad in the AHL. We'll see if he's still with the team next season. But his cap hit runs till 2027. Makes it very difficult to move him. Even with the rising cap, to tell a team, hey, you want to take on $5 million for Jack Campbell, most are going to say no. People will point out Arizona, I'm sure, in the comments, but Arizona's not looking to take on anchor contracts anymore. They want to start building up from within. The guys that they're bringing up, like Cooley, Gunther, these guys are going to need to get paid, and so they're not going to want to get, contracts on the books that they have no intention of having used at the National Hockey League level. A guy who doesn't fit into the picture for them. Seattle. Well, with Seattle, there was some speculation that Thomas Tatar could move. Tatar had a really strong start to his time in Seattle. He's cooled down since then. I think it's kind of let New Jersey off the hook for letting him go. Kind of, not completely, but kind of let them off the hook for letting him go. But yeah, Tatar's run in Seattle's been okay. Like, they kept him. He's a veteran player. They're not that far out of a playoff spot, but they're not that close either. So I was mildly surprised that Tatar didn't move again at the deadline. All right, Los Angeles. Los Angeles had to get creative too because there's a lot of guys there that you could mention. I'm going with Kaliev. Kaliev has had a lot of struggles scoring, but he's young and he's still got a lot of potential. So I think maybe teams did call about Kaliev. Maybe the Kings hung up on him. I have no idea. But the Kings have a roster where, like, I could have put Dubois up there, but he just signed a long-term extension. I could have put Talbot up there, but there weren't any rumors with Talbot necessarily that had any bite to them. Although if that Olmark thing had come through, it likely would have been Talbot going the other way. But yeah, Kaliev for me with LA. We'll see what happens with him. It feels similar to the Kakko situation with the Rangers, so maybe Kaliev for Kakko. See, there you go. There's trade speculation right there. Stupid hockey guy starting trade speculations after the trade deadline. How bold. Anyways, Kaliev for me with LA. With San Jose, considering they sold off most of their players, I would put down Hoffman, but Hoffman has not had a good year. And that cap hit's still too high. Barabanov, if he was playing this year the way he did last year, there's no way he would have stayed put at the deadline. He's had a far less productive season. He hasn't been quite as prominent for San Jose as last year. But still, could he have moved at the deadline? Yes, that cap hit, if San Jose had retained some on it, not too bad. We'll see whether or not Barabanov has a National Hockey League job next year, because you never really know. But yeah, Barabanov would be my pick from San Jose, a team that sold off most of the pieces they could. And again, honorable mention to Hoffman. I just don't think he has any value right now. Toronto. For all of the speculation, I don't know how accurate the speculation around Liljegren was, but it definitely puts him ahead of Samsonov. And Samsonov, definitely honorable mention here, but towards the trade deadline, there was a lot of talk about Liljegren. And we've seen the most from Liljegren we're going to. And is it time to move on? And maybe this is all he is. Yeah, all he is a good, effective top six defenseman. Who needs those? Not Toronto. So, yeah, Liljegren, there was a lot of speculation. Again, I don't know how much truth there was to any of it. If Toronto management wants to give me a call, cool. If you do, you're going to terrify me because I don't know how you got my phone number. But yeah, Liljegren, I don't know if he was actually going to move, but there was definitely a lot of speculation towards the trade deadline about whether or not he would be. Ottawa, another one there was a lot of speculation about. I would go with Chychrun, but I don't know that Chychrun actually had a lot of people calling Ottawa about his services. Chychrun's not had a very good year. Brandstrom's been okay at times, and Brandstrom's cap hit's a little more manageable for teams near the cap ceiling than the cap hit for Chychrun. So I'm mildly surprised Brandstrom's still in Ottawa. There's definitely been some issues with his development along the way, but he's still young enough that I could see a team picking him up and seeing what they can do with him, but it didn't happen before the deadline. Maybe it happens this summer. Florida. Florida, I'm going back a bit with this one because Florida, who am I going to write for Florida, really? Kind of got to be Bobrovsky. There was speculation for the last 2 years that Florida, because of their salary cap issues, because they have a good team, so you're going to get up near the cap when you have a good team, that they might end up trading Bobrovsky's contract. Because if you can free up, even if you retain, say, 20% of that contract, it's a $10 million cap hit, that frees up a lot of space. And there was always that speculation that, hey, Florida's going to want to make space. They're going to have to trade Bobrovsky to make space. It hasn't happened. Probably for the best it didn't. They got all the way to the final last year. They look like a team that could very well win the Stanley Cup this year. So probably for the best, Bobrovsky didn't move when all those rumors were out there. he's still there. So it qualifies him for this board in my eyes. For Boston, another goaltender. Ullmark turning down a trade to the West Coast. Good. Thank you. Sometimes you need players to stop you from making a mistake as the general manager. And I think it would have been a mistake for Boston to trade Ullmark. You want to trade the goalie hug? What is wrong with Don Sweeney? Anyways, Ullmark, this Boston fans like, finally he's talking about Don Sweeney like that. But yeah, Ullmark and Swayman are, in my eyes, the best tandem in the National Hockey League. I think trading Ullmark would have been a huge mistake. So whatever he put the kibosh on, I'm glad. Because even though Ullmark's stats this year aren't as good as last year's, and we knew they weren't going to be, he's still a very effective goaltender in the National Hockey League. And I don't see any reason to move him right now. So I'm glad he's still in Boston. Tampa Bay, another goaltender. And this is for a different reason. So Jonas Johansson has bounced around in his career. And there have been times where I've seen people say Johansson's the worst goalie in the league. He's not very good. Shouldn't be in the end. Like, there's been a lot of negativity around Johansson, but he's still the backup in Tampa. So Tampa at least trusts him as the backup, and he got a lot of games in while Vasilevsky was hurt. His stats and his advanced stats weren't great during that time, but they weren't nearly as bad as others would let you believe. Because again, I remember people saying he's the worst goalie in the NHL. He can't save anything. I don't know why he's still around. But Tampa Bay, a team that's won a couple of Stanley Cups in recent history, deciding he's good enough to be the backup to Vasilevsky. I don't think he's going to get very many games down the stretch, but the fact he's still there, I think, is somewhat noteworthy. Montreal. Montreal, I think, plays hardball at the deadline, and I'm not sure if that helps them or not. I don't know that they played hardball with Tanner Pearson or if teams just weren't calling. Pearson had a really strong start to the season, which had people speculating about what Montreal might be able to do with him at the deadline if they'd be able to flip him after they got him from Vancouver. Pearson's play has definitely not been great since then. He's had injuries as well. I know he had the one injury. Anyways, Pearson doesn't move at the deadline. Josh Anderson, of course, not moved at the deadline either. Last year, there were rumors that Kent Hughes turned down a first-round draft pick for Josh Anderson and figured we can get more for him later. At this point, I don't think you can get that for Anderson. So, we'll see how this whole method of deciding we're not going to drop our asks for players, how that works out long term. I know Montreal fans are quite happy with Montreal management, how they're doing things. Just we'll see how it goes long term. But yeah, Pearson still being there, kind of a surprise for me. For Buffalo, back to the goaltending. I was going to rate Buffalo. I got to rate Buffalo. Yeah, I'm surprised the Buffalo's still in Buffalo. Are there any Buffaloes in Buffalo? I don't think. Anyway, all right. Before I get too sidetracked, Comrie. So, teams with 3 goaltender rotations, there was a lot of speculation about who's going to go. Levi and UPL were going to be the tandem. Comrie clearly would be the guy on his way out. Comrie's still there. Levi is not playing at the NHL level right now. Mild surprise there for me with that one. Comrie's only 28. That kind of surprises me too. I would have pegged Comrie to probably be around 32 because it feels like he's been around the league for a while. But yeah, Comrie still being a member of the Buffalo organization. Mild surprise for me with that one. So last on the board is Detroit. Another goaltender. How many goalies did I put on this board? And another team with a 3 goaltender rotation that did not trade a goaltender at the deadline. Now, if Husso was healthy, maybe. But they have Reimer and they have Lyon. I'm kind of surprised Reimer's still there. Reimer's numbers have been down this year. Last year was a tough year for Reimer as well. But yeah, with that 3 goalie rotation, the expectation was you probably go with Husso and Lyon. And then Reimer gets traded at the deadline. But in this case, he does not. So let me know your thoughts. Let me know your pick for a player that you're surprised is still with the organization after the trade deadline. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe in the event you have not done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.